The sky above Seoul burned with colors that had no names in human languages. Taemin watched from the shattered window of an apartment building as the last human fighters fell from the sky like dying stars. The Drexian warships hung in the atmosphere like iron mountains, their weapons silent now. The battle was over. Earth had lost. 3 months of fighting had reduced the planet's greatest cities to graveyards. The Drexian Empire had come with a fleet so vast it blocked out the sun for days. They had weapons that could turn mountains to glass and oceans to steam. Humanity threw everything at them. Every missile, every ship, every soldier. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The radio in Taemin's hand crackled with static, then a voice he recognized. It was the Secretary General of the United Earth Government. The man sounded tired, broken. All military forces are ordered to stand down. Effective immediately. Earth surrenders unconditionally to the Drexian Empire. Lay down your weapons. The war is over. Taemin looked at the radio for a long moment, then threw it against the wall. It shattered into pieces. Around him, 5 other people sat in the darkness of the ruined apartment. They were all that remained of his unit. Once they had been part of the Republic of Korea's special forces. Now they were just survivors. Did you hear that? Ji-won asked. She sat with her back against the wall, a laptop balanced on her knees. Even now, even after everything, she was trying to hack into Drexian communication networks. Her fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. I heard it, Taemin said. He picked up his rifle and checked the ammunition. Half a magazine left. Orders are to surrender, Hyunwoo laughed. It was a bitter sound. Surrender to what? So they can put us in chains? So they can ship us off to some mining colony on the edge of space? He was the biggest of them. A demolitions expert who could build a bomb from spare parts and good intentions. We don't know what they'll do, said Sang-mi. She was the newest member of their group. A civilian doctor they'd found in a hospital 3 weeks ago. She'd been treating wounded soldiers while bombs fell around her. Maybe they'll let us live in peace. Ji-won stopped typing. Her face was lit by the glow of her screen in the darkness. I've been listening to their communications for 2 weeks now. I've learned some of their language. Enough to understand. She looked up at them and her eyes were hard. They're not here to make peace. They're here to take everything. Our resources, our technology, and us. They're going to use us as slaves. The room went quiet. Outside, they could hear the sound of Drexian dropships landing in the streets. The heavy footsteps of their soldiers. The alien voices calling out in languages that hurt human ears. Taemin walked to the window and looked down. Drexian soldiers were moving through the ruins, their armor gleaming even in the dim light. They were tall, nearly 7 feet, with skin that looked like polished stone. Each one carried weapons that could cut through tank armor. They were going door to door, pulling out survivors. Look, Hyunwoo said, pointing to the street below. A group of human soldiers had come out of a building, their hands raised in surrender. They still wore their uniforms, though they were torn and bloody. 20 men and women who had fought for 3 months without rest. The Drexian soldiers surrounded them, weapons pointed. For a moment, Taemin thought they would be taken prisoner. Then one of the humans said something. Maybe he protested. Maybe he just spoke without permission. A Drexian officer raised his hand and the weapons fired. Blue light filled the street. When it faded, the human soldiers were gone. Not dead, not fallen. Just gone. Erased. Sang-mi gasped and turned away from the window. Ji-won's fingers had stopped moving on her keyboard. Hyunwoo swore under his breath. They're killing prisoners, Taemin said quietly. Anyone who fought. Anyone who resists. They're not taking chances. We need to leave, Ji-won said. She closed her laptop and shoved it into her backpack. Now, before they searched this building, they gathered their few possessions in silence. Weapons, medical supplies, what little food they had left. Taemin took one last look at the city he'd grown up in. Seoul had been a place of light and life once. 10 million people had lived here. Now it was a tomb. They moved through the building like ghosts, down stairwells choked with rubble, through hallways where the walls had been blown away. They could hear Drexian soldiers in the building now, searching room by room. Twice they had to hide while patrols passed within feet of them. In the basement, Hyunwoo led them to a maintenance tunnel he'd discovered weeks ago. It connected to the old subway system, the parts that had been abandoned years before the war. The tunnels went on for miles under the city, a maze that the Drexians didn't know existed. They walked in darkness for hours. Ji-won used her laptop screen for light, the pale glow just enough to see by. The tunnel smelled of water and rust and death. They passed bodies sometimes, people who had tried to hide down here when the bombs started falling. Finally, they reached a station that Taemin recognized. It had been a hub once where 5 different subway lines met. Now it was home to nearly 200 people, survivors who had refused to surrender, soldiers without units, civilians who had nowhere else to go. A man approached them as they entered the station. His name was Dae-hyun, and before the war he had been an engineer. Now he was building bombs in the darkness, creating weapons from broken Drexian equipment and human ingenuity. "You heard the surrender order?" Dae-hyun asked. "We heard it," Taemin said. "What are we going to do?" Taemin looked around at the faces in the darkness. Old and young, soldiers and civilians, people who had lost everything. "The government surrendered," he said. "They had to. They were responsible for millions of lives. But we're not the government anymore. We're not even really soldiers. We're just people who refuse to stop." "The war is over," someone said from the crowd. "No," Ji-won said. She stepped forward, her laptop still in her hands. "The battle is over. The war doesn't end until we say it ends, until every human says it ends. And I don't know about you, but I'm not ready to say that yet." Hyunwoo nodded. "They think they've won. They think killing our armies means they've beaten us. They don't understand humans at all." Taemin raised his rifle. It was a gesture, nothing more. But in that moment it meant everything. They came here thinking we'd break, thinking that once they destroyed our governments and our armies, we'd just give up. They're about to learn something that every human knows in their bones. We don't stop fighting when the battle ends. We just change how we fight. Around the station, people were standing now, picking up weapons. The look in their eyes was changing from despair to something harder, something dangerous. "They declared victory today," Taemin said. "Let's show them what human victory really looks like." Above them, in the ruined city, the Drexian Empire celebrated their conquest. Their ships filled the sky, and their emperor broadcast messages of triumph across the galaxy. Earth had fallen in just 3 months. Another world added to their eternal empire. But in the darkness below the city, in tunnels and ruins and hidden places, humanity was learning a new kind of war. And the Drexians, for all their power and technology, had no idea what was coming. 6 months had passed since the surrender. Captain Zorn of the Drexian Imperial Guard stood in what had once been the center of Seoul and tried to understand why he felt afraid. His people had conquered 47 worlds. They had crushed species far more advanced than humans. Yet here, on this backward planet, something was wrong. 3 of his supply convoys had been destroyed in the last week alone. Not in battles. There were no battles anymore. The human military was gone, but the convoys still burned. His soldiers still died. Yesterday, an entire patrol had vanished in the eastern sector. 20 soldiers in full combat armor simply gone. "Captain," one of his officers approached. "We found them." Zorn followed the officer to a building on the edge of the district. Inside, his missing patrol lay in neat rows, dead, their weapons and armor stripped away. And on the wall above them, written in Drexian script, were the words, "You cannot kill an idea." Zorn stared at the message. Someone had learned their language. Someone had killed 20 of his best soldiers and left them here like a message, like a warning. Below the city, in tunnels that branched like veins, Taemin was planning the next attack. The resistance had grown. What had been 200 survivors was now nearly 500. People crawled out of the ruins every day asking to join. Asking to fight, Ji-won had become invaluable. She could crack Drexian communication systems like they were children's toys. Every patrol route, every supply schedule, every weakness in their security, she found it. She sat now with 3 laptops running simultaneously, screens full of alien text that she'd taught herself to read. "Their next supply convoy comes through the western district at dawn," she said without looking up. "Food and medical supplies for their garrison. 20 trucks, light guard detail. They think we won't hit them during daylight. Then we'll prove them wrong," Taemin said. He looked at Hyunwoo. "Can you do it?" Hyunwoo grinned. His hands were stained with chemicals from the bombs he'd been building. He'd learned to make explosives from Drexian power cells, from their own equipment turned against them. "Give me 6 hours. I'll bring down the whole street." Sangmi looked up from where she was treating a wounded fighter. The woman had been shot during a raid 2 days ago. "If you hit them during the day, civilians might be in the area." "I know," Taemin said. That's why we'll evacuate the area first. We're not the Drexians. We don't kill innocent people. The Resistance had rules. They'd written them down in the early days, when it would have been easy to lose themselves in anger and revenge. They didn't hurt civilians, human or otherwise. They didn't use torture. They fought the occupation, not innocents. It was what separated them from the empire they were fighting. The attack on the convoy went perfectly. Hyunwoo's bombs brought down 2 buildings just as the trucks passed between them. The debris buried the entire convoy. Before the Drexian relief force could arrive, Taiman's fighters had taken everything they needed: food, medicine, weapons. Then they vanished back into the ruins like smoke. But it wasn't just Seoul. Across the planet, other cells were forming. In the ruins of what had been New York, a group led by a woman named Bo-Ra was hitting supply depots. In the mountains of the former Himalayan region, fighters were ambushing patrols. On the coast, underwater teams were sabotaging Drexian ships in harbor. The Empire had expected resistance at first. Every conquered world had holdouts, small groups that refused to accept defeat. But those groups always faded. Within a year, maybe 2, they would realize the futility of fighting and surrender. Or they would die. Either way, the problem solved itself. Humans were different. After 6 months, the resistance was stronger than ever. The Drexians had lost more soldiers during the occupation than they had during the actual war. Supply lines were constantly disrupted, bases were attacked, officers were assassinated, and the humans kept learning, kept adapting. Kyung-soo led a cell in what had been the Japanese islands. He'd been a naval officer before the war, and he'd brought that expertise to the resistance. His people had salvaged old submarines from the ocean floor, repaired them with stolen Drexian technology, and were now hunting Imperial ships in the Pacific. Last week, they'd sunk 3 supply vessels. The week before, they'd torpedoed a troop transport. Kyung-soo's cell was only 30 people, but they were making the Drexians afraid to use the ocean. In orbit above Earth, Admiral Krex was reading reports and feeling something his species rarely experienced: doubt. He'd been assigned to Earth because it was supposed to be easy. A subjugated world, pacified, requiring only routine patrols. Instead, it was becoming a nightmare. He pulled up the casualty reports. In 6 months of occupation, they'd lost more than 4,000 soldiers. Hundreds of vehicles destroyed. Dozens of ships damaged or sunk. The supply situation was becoming critical. They were spending more resources holding Earth than they'd spent conquering it. Krex opened a communication channel to the Imperial homeworld. When Emperor Valth's face appeared on the screen, the Admiral chose his words carefully. Questioning the Emperor's decisions was dangerous. Your Majesty, I request additional forces for Earth. You have 20,000 soldiers, Valth said. His voice was cold. More than enough to control one primitive world. The humans are not behaving as conquered people should. They're organized. They're effective. Every day our losses increase. Then increase your security measures. Execute prisoners. Destroy their cities if you must. Show them the cost of resistance. We have tried that, Your Majesty. It only makes them fight harder. Valth leaned forward. Are you telling me that the Drexian Empire, conqueror of 47 worlds, cannot control a species that barely had space travel? Krex wanted to say yes. He wanted to explain that humanity was different from every other species they'd conquered, that these people didn't think like rational beings, that they would rather die fighting than live in peace under Imperial rule. But he knew Valth wouldn't listen. No, Your Majesty. We will prevail. See that you do. I will not tolerate failure. The communication ended. Krex sat in his command chair and looked at the planet below. From orbit, Earth looked peaceful. Beautiful, even. But he knew what was happening down there. In every city, every town, every place his people went, humans were waiting, watching, planning. In Seoul, Jiwon had intercepted that conversation. She'd learned to crack their orbital communications months ago. Now she played the recording for Taemin and the others. He's asking for reinforcements, Jiwon said. That means we're hurting them. Good, Hyunwoo said. Let them send more soldiers. More targets for us, but Taemin was thinking. He said something important. He said the humans aren't behaving like conquered people. That's because we're not conquered. They beat our governments. They beat our armies. But they didn't beat us. Sangmi was documenting everything. Every attack, every Drexian death, every small victory. She was creating a record. A history of the resistance. Someday, when this was over, people would need to know what happened here, how humans refused to accept defeat. We need to expand, Taemin said. Other worlds, other species that the Empire has conquered. If we can make contact with them, share what we've learned, maybe they'll start fighting too. Ji-won nodded. I can send messages. Hide them in Drexian communications. If anyone out there is listening, they'll hear us. That night, while Drexian patrols moved through the ruins above, Ji-won sent humanity's first message to the stars. It was simple, encoded in a way that other conquered peoples might understand but the Drexians would miss. We are Earth. We have not surrendered. We will never surrender. Join us. On a dozen worlds across the Empire, people who had learned to accept their chains heard that message. Some dismissed it, but others began to wonder. If humans could resist, maybe they could too. In his command center, Captain Zorn received another report. Another convoy destroyed, another patrol missing. He looked at his officers and saw the same thing he felt, fear. They had won the war, so why did it feel like they were losing? 1 year after the so-called victory, Emperor Valth stood before the Imperial Council and lied. Earth is pacified, he told them. The human resistance is a minor inconvenience, nothing more. The councilors nodded, but Valth could see doubt in their eyes. They had access to the same reports he did. They knew the truth. The occupation of Earth was consuming resources at an alarming rate. 3 full legions were now stationed there, and they were barely maintaining control. On Earth, the resistance had evolved from scattered survivors into something that frightened the Empire. Every continent had multiple cells. Every city had fighters. The humans had developed a way of war that the Drexians couldn't counter. They called it guerrilla warfare, though the Drexians had no translation for the term. Bo-Ra had become the voice of the resistance. Before the war, she'd been a journalist. Now she was something more dangerous, a weapon made of words. She'd learned to hack into Drexian propaganda broadcasts and slip human messages into them. The Drexians would broadcast their messages of imperial glory, and buried in the signal would be instructions for resistance cells, coded in languages the Empire didn't know existed. She sat in a hidden room somewhere in the ruins of old Los Angeles, speaking into a microphone. This is Free Earth Radio. Today marks 1 year since the Empire claimed victory over our world. 1 year since they told us the war was over. But the war isn't over. It will never be over until they leave our world and never return. Her broadcasts weren't just for humans anymore. Ji-won had taught her how to reach other worlds, other species under Imperial control. Bo-Ra spoke to them too in their own languages, telling them about human resistance, telling them they could fight back. To our brothers and sisters on other worlds, Bo-Ra said, her voice steady. The Empire wants you to believe that resistance is futile. That once you lose the war, you have no choice but to submit. We are here to tell you that's a lie. We lost every battle. We lost the war. But we did not lose our will to fight, and that makes all the difference. On a world called Kelmar, 300 light-years from Earth, a factory worker named Thren heard that broadcast. His people had been conquered by the Drexians 15 years ago. They had accepted it. What choice did they have? But now, hearing about humans who refused to accept defeat, Thren began to think differently. He spoke to others in the factory. Quietly at first, then with more confidence. Within weeks, production in that factory had dropped by 30%. Equipment broke down mysteriously. Shipments went to wrong destinations. Small things. But they added up. The same thing was happening on a dozen other worlds. The disease of resistance was spreading, and humans were the carriers. Kyungsu's cell in the Pacific had grown to 200 fighters. They had 5 submarines now, all rebuilt from wrecks and scavenged Drexian technology. They'd learned to avoid Drexian sensors, to strike without warning and vanish before retaliation could come. 2 weeks ago, they'd done something unprecedented. They'd captured a Drexian supply ship intact. The crew had been given a choice: leave Earth on a small transport or die with their ship. They'd chosen to leave. Kyungsu let them go with a message for their commanders. Tell them this, he'd said through a translator. Tell them that humans don't just fight to win. We fight to make our enemies regret ever raising a hand against us. Tell them to leave our world while they still can. The Drexians had tried to destroy Kyungsu's base many times. They'd carpet-bombed areas where they thought the submarines were hiding. They'd sent hunter teams into the depths. But the ocean was vast, and the humans knew how to use that vastness. For every submarine the Drexians destroyed, 2 more appeared. In Seoul, Taemin's organization had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. There were thousands of fighters now, operating in cells across the entire Korean peninsula. They'd liberated entire towns, driving out Drexian garrisons and holding the territory for weeks before melting away when reinforcements arrived. Dae-hyun had become a master of improvised weapons. He'd figured out how to reverse-engineer Drexian power cells and was building weapons that could punch through their armor. He'd trained dozens of others in his techniques, and now every resistance cell had someone who could make bombs, create weapons, turn the enemy's technology against them. But the humans weren't just fighting with weapons. Ji-won had discovered something crucial. The Drexians depended heavily on automated systems. Their logistics, their communications, even their weapons had computer systems running them, and computers could be hacked. She'd spent months learning their programming languages, understanding their systems. Now she could cause chaos with a few keystrokes. Supply shipments would be rerouted to wrong locations. Patrol schedules would be scrambled. Sometimes she could even cause their weapons to malfunction at critical moments. Their biggest weakness, Ji-won explained to the others, is that they trust their technology too much. They think because their systems are advanced, they're secure. But security isn't about how advanced something is. It's about how well you protect it. And they're arrogant. They never thought a primitive species like us could crack their codes. Admiral Krex was no longer asking for reinforcements. He was begging for them. His reports to Emperor Valth had become increasingly desperate. The situation on Earth was deteriorating. The humans weren't just fighting anymore. They were winning. We control the major cities during the day, Krex reported, but at night they belong to the Resistance. We control the roads, but not what travels on them. We control the airspace, but our ships are attacked every time they land. Your Majesty, I must be honest. We are not pacifying this world. This world is bleeding us dry. For the first time, Valth seemed to hear him. What do you recommend? Withdrawal. We should cut our losses and leave Earth. It's not worth the cost. Unacceptable. The Empire does not retreat. It does not show weakness. With respect, Your Majesty, remaining here is the greater weakness. We have 40,000 soldiers on Earth now. That's 2 full legions pulled from other duties. The financial cost is enormous, and the humans are teaching other species to resist. 3 worlds have reported increased insurgent activity in the last month. All of them exposed to human propaganda. Valth stood from his throne. Then we will make an example of Earth. If the humans want to fight, we will give them a war. Prepare for orbital bombardment. We will burn their cities until they beg for mercy. But Krex knew it wouldn't work. They'd tried bombardment before. It only made the humans angrier. It only made them fight harder. There was something in the human spirit that the Drexians couldn't understand. These people would rather die free than live as slaves. In the Drexian Imperial Council, Counselor Thane was growing concerned. He'd been watching the Earth situation carefully, and he understood what the Emperor refused to see. This wasn't just about one planet anymore. It was about the Empire itself. Other conquered worlds were watching Earth. They were seeing that the mighty Drexian Empire could be resisted. That occupation wasn't permanent. That a supposedly primitive species was making the Empire look foolish. Thane had access to intelligence reports that Valth ignored. Insurgent activity was increasing on 15 worlds now. Production was down across the Empire. Soldiers were demoralized. The cost of maintaining control was skyrocketing, and it all traced back to Earth, to humans, to a species that refused to accept defeat. In her hidden radio station, Bora was broadcasting again. Today, I want to talk about what it means to resist. The Empire thinks resistance is about winning battles. It's not. Resistance is about making occupation so costly, so painful, so exhausting that the occupiers give up. We don't have to destroy their fleet. We just have to make them bleed for every meter of ground they hold. We have to make them afraid. We have to make them regret ever coming to our world. Her words were heard across the galaxy. On Kelmar, Thren and his fellow workers had shut down the entire factory. On a world called Brecht, farmers had stopped producing food for the Empire. On Xandor, miners had collapsed their own tunnels rather than let the Drexians take what they dug up. The Empire was facing something it had never encountered before: coordinated, sustained resistance across multiple worlds, and at the center of it all were humans, teaching other species what they'd learned in a year of desperate fighting. Taemin stood in the ruins of Seoul's old city hall and looked at the stars. Somewhere up there, the Drexian Empire was learning a lesson that humanity had known for thousands of years. Conquest is easy. Occupation is hard, and occupying people who refuse to be occupied is impossible. They're going to try something big soon, Jiwon said, joining him. I can see it in their communications. They're angry, desperate, that makes them dangerous. Let them come, Taemin said. We've been preparing for this. Every cell, every fighter, every civilian who supports us, we're ready. Do you think we can win? Taemin smiled. We already are winning. Every day they stay here, they lose. Every soldier they have to send to Earth is a soldier they can't use elsewhere. Every credit they spend on occupying us is a credit that weakens their empire. We don't have to destroy them. We just have to outlast them. 2 years after their victory, the Drexian Empire was discovering what defeat felt like. Emperor Valth stared at the reports covering his desk and felt something he'd never experienced before. Fear. Not for himself, but for his empire. Earth was supposed to be a minor conquest, a primitive world with limited resources, but good strategic location. It should have been simple. Instead, it had become a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. 40% of the imperial military was now dedicated to holding human worlds. 40%, and they still couldn't maintain control. The economic numbers were worse. The cost of occupying Earth and its colonies exceeded any possible benefit by a factor of 10. They were losing money every day. The imperial treasury, once thought infinite, was running dry. And other worlds, seeing the empire's weakness, were beginning to rebel. On Earth, Yoonji had achieved something remarkable. She was a pilot who'd spent the war flying relief missions, evacuating civilians from combat zones. After the surrender, she joined the resistance with a crazy plan: steal a Drexian fighter. It had taken her 6 months to pull it off. She'd studied their security, learned their patrol patterns, even learned enough of their language to impersonate a ground crew technician. Finally, at a base in what had been Russia, she'd walked onto the flight line, climbed into a fighter, and simply flown away. The Drexians had tried to shoot her down. She'd outflown them all. Now that fighter was in a hidden base in the mountains, and Daehyun was taking it apart piece by piece, learning everything he could about Drexian technology. This is incredible, Daehyun said, holding up a component. Their power systems are decades ahead of ours. But look at this. See how it's designed? They prioritize power over efficiency. That's a weakness. If we can overload the system, the whole thing shuts down. Taemin watched as Daehyun worked. Can you build something that does that? A weapon that shuts down their equipment? Give me a month. I'll give you a weapon that can disable every piece of Drexian tech in a square kilometer. But the biggest breakthrough came from Jae-sung. He'd been a diplomat before the war, skilled at reading people and situations. Now he used those skills to infiltrate a Drexian intelligence facility in what had been Beijing. He'd posed as a collaborator, a human willing to work with the Empire in exchange for safety. It had taken him 8 months to gain their trust. 8 months of passing them useless information while learning everything he could. Finally, he'd gained access to their central database. What he found there changed everything. Jae-sung escaped with thousands of files on a stolen data drive. When Jiwon decrypted them, they gathered everyone to hear what he'd learned. The Drexians have never faced this before, Jae-sung explained. In their entire history, they've conquered 47 worlds. Every single species they defeated accepted their conquest within 2 years. Some fought longer at first, but they always gave up, always, until us. Why? Sangmi asked. What makes us different? Their psychology is different from ours. When a Drexian loses, they accept it. It's part of their culture. The strong rule, the weak submit. It's how they think. They can't understand a species that refuses to accept defeat. To them, we're acting irrationally. Jiwon leaned forward. What else did you find? Reports from other worlds. The insurgencies we've been hearing about. They're real and they're spreading. On Kelmar, production is down 60%. On Brecht, they've had to import food because the locals won't farm for them. On 7 different worlds, attacks on Imperial forces have increased by 300% in the last year. Because of us, Taemin said. Because of us, Jae-sung confirmed. Bora's broadcasts have reached every corner of the Empire. Other species are learning that resistance is possible, that the Empire can be fought. We've started something that the Drexians can't stop. In the Imperial Council chamber, Counselor Thane was making the same argument to his fellow counselors. We must face reality. The Earth occupation is destroying us, not just financially, but strategically. Every soldier we send to Earth is a soldier we can't use to maintain control elsewhere. And the humans are teaching other species to resist. You suggest we surrender? Another counselor asked mockingly. I suggest we negotiate. Offer the humans limited autonomy. Reduce our presence to a single garrison. Anything to stop the bleeding. The Emperor will never agree. Then the Emperor is leading us to ruin. It was a dangerous thing to say. Several counselors looked at Thane with shock. Questioning the Emperor was close to treason. But Thane could see agreement in some faces. Others were thinking the same thing but lacked the courage to say it. The situation was even worse than the Council knew. On 15 worlds now, open rebellion had broken out. Not just insurgencies, but actual armed uprisings. Species that had been conquered for decades were suddenly fighting back, and they were using human tactics, human strategies, lessons learned from Earth. But Commander Reth, who'd been hunting the resistance since the beginning, sat in his command post and wrote a request he never thought he'd make. He was requesting permission to withdraw from Earth. Not retreat, he told himself. Strategic redeployment. But the truth was simpler. They were losing. His forces had been reduced by half through constant attrition. Every week, more soldiers died. Every week, more equipment was destroyed. The humans had become ghosts, striking from nowhere and vanishing before retaliation could come. His troops were exhausted, demoralized, afraid. The response came back within hours. Request denied. Hold position. Reinforcements coming. But Reth knew reinforcements wouldn't help. The Empire could send 1 million soldiers to Earth and it wouldn't matter. The humans didn't fight armies. They fought the will to occupy. And will was something you couldn't defeat with soldiers. Kyungsu's submarines had become legends. They controlled the oceans now. Drexian ships only traveled in heavily armed convoys, and even then they weren't safe. Last month, Kyungsu had sunk an Imperial destroyer, a warship that had survived the initial invasion, destroyed by a submarine built from scrap and determination. The Drexians had tried to eliminate Kyungsu's bases dozens of times. They'd bombed the oceans, sent hunter-killer groups into the depths, even tried to poison the water. Nothing worked. The submarines moved constantly, supplied by underwater caches that Kyungsu had established across the Pacific. They're afraid of the water now, Kyungsu told his crew. Good, fear is a weapon. Let them be afraid. In Seoul, Hyunwoo had perfected Daehyun's electromagnetic pulse weapon. It looked like a large backpack, heavy but portable. When activated, it released a pulse that fried all Drexian electronics within a kilometer. Weapons stopped working. Armor locked up. Vehicles died. Communications went silent. The first time they used it, a Drexian patrol simply froze. Their armor became tombs. The humans had walked through them like they were statues, taking weapons and equipment, then vanishing before reinforcements arrived. Now, every major resistance cell had at least one EMP weapon. The Drexians had to choose between using their advanced technology or protecting against the pulse. They couldn't do both. Bora's broadcasts had evolved. She wasn't just spreading propaganda anymore. She was coordinating resistance across multiple worlds. Using G1's communications network, she could send messages to insurgents on Kelmar, Brest, Xandor, and a dozen other worlds. They were sharing tactics, strategies, lessons learned. Today we received word from Kelmar, Bora announced in her latest broadcast. The resistance there has captured their capital city. The Drexian garrison withdrew after 3 weeks of fighting. This is the first time since the Empire began that they've been driven from a capital. And it happened because the people of Kelmar learned from us. They learned that resistance is possible. On the Drexian homeworld, citizens who had never questioned their empire's glory were beginning to see cracks. The news spoke of victories, but everyone knew people who died on Earth. Everyone knew the Empire was struggling. Some were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. Emperor Valth called a meeting with Admiral Krex and demanded answers. How is it possible that we are losing to primitives? Krex had given up trying to be diplomatic. Because they're not primitives, Your Majesty. They're humans. And humans have something we don't understand. They have this idea that freedom is worth dying for, that being conquered is worse than death. We can kill them, but we can't make them submit. Then kill them all. Exterminate them. We tried that. We've destroyed cities, killed millions. It doesn't work. Every human we kill creates 10 more who want to fight. They have this saying, "You can kill me, but you can't kill my cause." And they mean it. Valth slumped in his throne. What do you recommend? Withdrawal? Not just from Earth, but from all human worlds. Cut our losses. The Empire is strong enough to survive this, but only if we admit our mistake and move on. The Empire does not admit mistakes. Then the Empire will fall, Your Majesty, because this isn't sustainable. We're losing money, losing soldiers, losing the respect of our own people, and all because we refuse to accept that one species beat us. In the Resistance headquarters under Seoul, Taimin gathered the leaders for a meeting. Ji-won, Hyunwoo, Sang-mi, Dae-hyun, and representatives from cells across the planet. They had news. 3 years after declaring victory over Earth, the Drexian Empire was collapsing. Emperor Valth sat alone in his throne room and watched his empire burn on a dozen screens. Rebellions on 18 worlds. The treasury empty. His own council divided, and at the center of it all, like a wound that wouldn't heal, was Earth. The humans had done something no other species had managed. They'd shown the galaxy that the Empire could be resisted, that occupation wasn't permanent, that even the mightiest conquerors could be defeated by determined resistance. And now the bill was coming due. On Earth, the resistance had grown beyond anything Taimin had imagined. Millions of fighters across every continent. They didn't just control the countryside anymore. They were taking cities. Last week, resistance forces had driven the Drexians out of what had been Mumbai. The week before, they'd liberated Rio. The Empire's grip on Earth was crumbling. In Seoul, Taimin's cell was preparing for the biggest operation yet. They were going to take back the city. All of it, not a raid, not a temporary liberation. They were going to drive the Drexians out and keep them out. Hyunwoo had been planning the attack for months. They had weapons now, real weapons built from captured Drexian technology and human ingenuity. They had Daehyun's EMP devices. They had Yoonji training pilots on captured fighters. They had Ji-won, who could crash every Drexian computer system in the city with a keystroke. The main garrison is here, Hyunwoo said, pointing to a map. 5,000 soldiers, heavy weapons, air support. They think they're safe. They're wrong. The attack began at dawn. Ji-won activated her viruses and every Drexian computer system in Seoul went dark. Communications failed. Weapons targeting systems crashed. Automated defenses shut down. For 30 seconds, the Drexian garrison was blind and helpless. That was all the time the resistance needed. EMP devices activated, killing power armor and vehicles. Fighters poured in from every direction. Thousands of them using weapons they'd taken from the enemy and turned against them. The Drexians tried to fight back, but they were confused, disorganized, cut off from support. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Drexian garrison had surrendered. 5,000 soldiers, the pride of the imperial military, defeated by human fighters using guerrilla tactics and captured weapons. Taimin stood in the center of Seoul as the Drexian flag came down and a human flag went up. Around him, people were crying and cheering and hugging each other. After 3 years of occupation, Seoul was free. But the liberation wasn't just happening in Seoul. Across the planet, resistance cells were launching coordinated attacks. The Drexians had spread themselves too thin trying to hold everything. Now they were losing everywhere at once. In the Pacific, Kyung-soo's submarines surfaced in broad daylight. They'd been hiding for 3 years. Now they came up flying human flags and began escorting civilian ships that the Drexians no longer dared to attack. The oceans belonged to humanity again. Bora was broadcasting from a liberated radio station now, not hiding anymore. Her voice reached across the galaxy, telling the story of Earth's resistance to anyone who would listen. Today, we took back Seoul. Tomorrow we take back Tokyo, London, Cairo. The Empire thought they could crush us. They thought that winning battles meant winning the war. They were wrong. They won every battle. But they lost the war. Because you can't defeat people who refuse to accept defeat. On other worlds, the news from Earth electrified resistance movements. If humans could drive out the Empire, maybe they could too. On Kelmar, Thren led an attack on the planetary governor's compound. On Brest, farmers armed themselves and marched on the capital. On Xandor, miners emerged from their collapsed tunnels with weapons they'd been making in the dark. The Empire was facing coordinated rebellion across a quarter of its territory. They didn't have enough soldiers to stop it. They didn't have enough money to pay for it. And they didn't have the will to continue. In the Imperial Council, Councillor Thane made his move. He'd been gathering support for months, talking to other councillors, building a coalition. Now, with the Empire crumbling, he had the votes he needed. Emperor Valth has led us to ruin, Thane said in the council chamber. His pride would not let him admit mistake. His arrogance has cost us everything. I call for a vote of no confidence. The room went silent. No emperor had ever been challenged like this. But Thane had judged the mood correctly. One by one, councillors stood and voted against Valth. When the count was finished, it was overwhelming. Valth had lost. You cannot do this, Valth said, but his voice was weak. He knew it was over. The council has spoken. You are removed from power. Guards escort the former emperor to his chambers. Thane took the throne that same day. His first act was to order a complete military withdrawal from Earth and all human-controlled worlds. His second was to send a message to the human resistance requesting negotiations. Taemin received that message in the liberated city of Seoul. The Drexian Empire wanted to negotiate. They wanted peace. After 3 years of fighting, they were admitting defeat. The resistance leadership gathered to discuss the offer. Should they negotiate? Or should they push forward, drive the Drexians out completely? We've won, Sangmi said. They're leaving. That's what we wanted. But we need to make sure they never come back, Ji-won countered. We need guarantees, treaties. We need to make sure this never happens again. Taemin listened to the arguments, then stood. We negotiate, but from a position of strength. We've proven we can fight. Now we prove we can build. The galaxy needs to see that humans aren't just warriors. We're survivors. We're builders. We're people who will never accept chains. The negotiations took place in neutral space, aboard a station run by a species that had never been conquered. Taemin led the human delegation. Councillor Thane represented the Empire. The Empire withdraws from all human space immediately, Thane said. We recognize Earth's sovereignty and the sovereignty of all human colonies. We will pay reparations for damages caused during the war and occupation. Not enough, Taemin said. You also release all species you currently occupy. You dismantle your empire of conquest. You become a single world again, focused on your own people, not subjugating others. That's impossible. We can't just abandon 47 worlds. You can and you will, because if you don't, we'll teach those worlds what we taught Earth. And in 10 years, you won't have an empire. You'll have 50 rebellions that will tear your civilization apart. Is that what you want? Thane looked at the human across from him. This man had been a soldier 3 years ago. Now he was negotiating the future of the galaxy, and the frightening thing was he was right. If the Empire tried to hold on to its conquests now after Earth had shown the way, it would face rebellions it couldn't control. I'll need to consult with the Council. You have 1 week, Taemin said. After that, we start teaching the galaxy what we know. The Council met for 3 days. The debate was fierce. Some wanted to refuse, to try to rebuild the Empire's strength. But Thane had the numbers and the arguments. In the end, they agreed. The Empire would dismantle itself. Occupied worlds would be freed. The age of Drexian conquest was over. Earth began to rebuild. The cities that had been destroyed were slowly rising again. Sangmi opened hospitals to treat wounded fighters and civilians alike. Daehyun converted his weapons workshops into factories that built homes and schools and infrastructure. Yunwoo went back to his old job as a teacher, though he kept a rifle in his classroom. Just in case, Ji-won became humanity's ambassador to other worlds, helping freed species build their own resistance networks in case they ever needed them again. Bo-ra continued broadcasting, but now she told stories of rebuilding instead of fighting, stories of hope instead of resistance, though she always ended her broadcasts the same way. Stay vigilant. Remember what we learned. Never let anyone put chains on you again. Kyung-soo and his crews brought their submarines to the surface permanently. They became the core of a new human navy, one that would protect Earth's waters and ensure no one ever invaded again. Yoonji trained a new generation of pilots. The resistance fighters became the foundation of a proper military, one that would defend but never conquer. Because humans had learned something during the occupation. They'd learned what it felt like to be conquered. And they swore never to do that to anyone else. Taemin stood at the memorial that had been built in the center of Seoul. It was a wall of names. Every resistance fighter who'd died in 3 years of fighting. Thousands of names. Thousands of people who'd refused to accept defeat. We did it, Ji-won said, standing beside him. We actually did it. We survived, Taemin corrected. We fought, we bled. We never stopped. And that made all the difference. Across the galaxy, the freed worlds were building their own memorials, their own stories of resistance. And at the center of all of them was the same lesson that humans had taught. Conquest is easy, but occupying free people is impossible. The Drexians, for their part, returned to their homeworld and began the long process of rebuilding their civilization. They would never be an empire again. They'd learned at terrible cost that some species would rather die than submit, and humans had taught them that lesson in the hardest way possible.